In 1972, the CIA authorized payments to Stanford Research Institute to test whether a former police officer named Pat Price could describe the contents of a sealed building using only his mind. He could not be physically present. He had no access to documents or photographs. The program that funded this experiment ran for over 20 years and cost the American government an estimated $20 million. The show that dramatized what happened to the children who came before him is called Stranger Things. What actually happened is considerably stranger. Bluebook Case File 86002, partially declassified. This is the Bluebook division, broadcasting from a basement office where the files don't always stay buried. Tonight's case concerns the real children behind the psychic experiments, the documented programs that ran parallel to the fiction depicted in Stranger Things. We trace the history, the methods, and the lasting consequences of research that treated vulnerable children as subjects rather than human beings. During the Cold War, government agencies such as the CIA and military branches pursued psychic phenomena as potential espionage tools. The Stargate project, a classified CIA initiative, is among the most documented programs investigating remote viewing, the claimed ability to perceive distant or unseen targets through extrasensory perception. SRI International, a research institute in California, played a central role in remote viewing studies, with figures like Ingo Swann pioneering the protocols. While adult participants dominate the declassified records, there are unverified reports suggesting children were occasionally recruited or involved in lesser-known experiments. Pat Price, a former police officer turned remote viewer, is one of the best documented individuals associated with these programs. His abilities were tested under controlled conditions, yet the scarcity of documented child participants may reflect classification or deliberate obfuscation rather than absence. The Cold War urgency to develop unconventional intelligence methods likely pressured agencies to experiment with vulnerable populations, including minors, though direct evidence remains elusive. One case that brought government-funded psychic research into sharp focus was that of Uri Geller, the Israeli illusionist and self-proclaimed psychic, who became the subject of classified CIA-sponsored tests at Stanford Research Institute in California between 1972 and 1973. Physicists Russell Targ and Hal Puthoff conducted a series of experiments designed to test Geller's alleged ability to read sealed envelopes, reproduce hidden drawings, and influence physical objects at a distance. Their findings, later published in the journal Nature in 1974, concluded that Geller had demonstrated genuine paranormal abilities under controlled conditions, a conclusion that drew fierce criticism from the scientific community and remains disputed to this day. What is not disputed is that the CIA funded the research, that the results were taken seriously enough to continue the program, and that Geller was not the only subject. The Stanford experiments formed part of a broader classified effort that ran for over 2 decades. The question of whether any of it worked is almost secondary to what the program reveals about the lengths to which governments were prepared to go, and the individuals willing and unwilling who became part of that pursuit. Children subjected to psychic experiments reportedly experienced a range of psychological effects, including anxiety, trauma, and lasting social alienation. These impacts stemmed not only from the experimental procedures, but from the secrecy and isolation imposed upon them. A lack of informed consent and understanding of the experiments contributed to confusion and distress among child subjects. Many were too young to grasp the implications, compounding feelings of helplessness and exploitation. Some former participants, speaking retrospectively, have described lifelong struggles with mental health, post-traumatic stress, identity issues, difficulty reconciling their experiences with ordinary adult life. The stigma attached to claims of psychic ability led to further social exclusion. Disclosure risked ridicule or disbelief, complicating reintegration into normal environments. This remains unverified in most cases, given the classified nature of the programs. But the pattern is consistent enough across multiple testimonies to warrant serious consideration. Ethical standards in mid-20th century research were markedly different from today's protocols. Informed consent, especially for minors, was often overlooked or inadequately obtained. The National Research Act of 1974, which established regulations for research involving human subjects, did not exist during the period in question. This absence gave researchers considerable latitude, with minimal oversight and no institutional review boards to provide a check. Vulnerable populations, particularly children, became subjects of experimentation without sufficient safeguards. Documents from the period indicate that researchers frequently prioritized results over ethical considerations. Children, lacking the capacity to fully understand the nature of the experiments, were treated as data points rather than individuals with rights. Today, such practices would be deemed unacceptable. The shadows of these historical transgressions remain. Several instances of child involvement in psychic experiments have emerged in the historical record, though most remain shrouded in ambiguity. Anecdotal evidence from SRI International suggests that children were occasionally included in studies of psychic phenomena. Reports from former employees indicate that children were used in attempts to gauge potential psychic abilities, yet specific details remain sparse and frequently contradictory. Some recall children being present during tests. Others maintain that no minors were directly included in any documented session. This inconsistency raises questions about the reliability of the historical narrative surrounding these experiments. The absence of official documentation regarding child participants complicates any effort to determine the full extent of their involvement, and suggests, at minimum, that the record was not kept with any intention of transparency. The veil of secrecy surrounding government-sponsored psychic research has contributed to public skepticism and institutional denial. Declassified documents reveal that many initiatives were buried under layers of classification, leading to speculation that persists to this day. Whistleblowers such as Jim Schnabel, author of Remote Viewers, have criticized these programs for their secrecy and questionable scientific rigor. Though Schnabel's account offers limited detail on child involvement, which itself highlights a gap in the public record. The portrayal of such experiments in popular culture, particularly through Stranger Things, has added to the mystique. These dramatizations capture the imagination. They also risk trivializing the genuine suffering of those involved, particularly children who had no say in their participation and no language to describe what had been done to them. The legacy of psychic experiments involving children raises questions that contemporary research ethics has not fully resolved. Modern standards emphasize informed consent and the protection of minors, yet the shadow of past transgressions remains instructive. Current discussions draw parallels between historical psychic research and contemporary studies in psychology and neuroscience. The necessity of safeguarding participants, especially children, remains a critical concern. Researchers today are more aware of the psychological consequences that participation in experimental studies can have on minors, and that heightened awareness is in direct response to the failures documented here. Whether we are truly learning from history is a different question. The potential for exploitation in the name of research has not disappeared, it has simply changed its vocabulary. This episode contains discussions of historical government programs, child experimentation, and psychological trauma. The events described are drawn from declassified documents and published accounts. Where evidence is limited or contested, this has been noted. The case file remains open. Further material will be declassified in due course. Channel 86, out.